In this lesson, we're going to install a client access server array within our training lab environment. Now, some of you might be thinking, why are we installing a CAS array when we've only got one Exchange server? Because you might be of the understanding that a CAS array is for high availability purposes and that it's usually made up of multiple client access servers. So that is partially correct. It is the CAS array that allows the client access server to be made highly available, but the CAS array itself is not highly available. A CAS array is basically just a pointer within an Active Directory site to a DNS name that resolves to an IP address that is the RPC client access server for that Active Directory site. And that IP address can be a standalone client access server, or it can be some kind of load balanced IP address, perhaps with Windows Network load balancing or a hardware load balancer. So a CAS array is not actually highly available until it's pointing at something that is highly available, such as a load balancer. And it is in fact a best practice to establish a CAS array in your Active Directory site before you deploy any users onto your Exchange 2010 server. And I'll demonstrate why. So here what I've got is a Windows 7 computer with Office 2010 running, and I've got my Outlook profile settings open so that you can see the server settings that have been configured. As you can see here, x2010 server.exchange.bootcamp.local is the server that it's connecting to. Now that is the name of the client access server, not the mailbox server. Remember that in Exchange 2010 is the client access server that accepts client MAPI communications. Just so happens that in this lab scenario, both those roles are installed on the same server, but it helps to think of them as separate, distinct roles. So now on the Exchange server itself, what we can do is go ahead and establish that client access server array. And the first part of that is the DNS record. So open up your DNS management console and just drill down into your Active Directory DNS zone, exchange.bootcamp.local in my case. What we're going to do is establish an A record for the CAS array. Now, it can be tempting to make this the same A record or same DNS name as services such as Outlook Web Access, but it's not actually required to be the same. And in fact, I recommend that you make it different, because a name like mail.exchangebbootcamp.com used for Outlook Web Access will generally be the same name used no matter which Active Directory site a user is in. It'll be one unified namespace for Outlook Web App. Whereas if you do have multiple sites within your organization, you'll need a unique CAS array name for each site, because a CAS array relates to only one Active Directory site. So in a multi-site environment, you would come up with a naming standard for your client access server arrays. Now what I'm going to do in this training lab is just call it Outlook and enter the same IP address for the Exchange server itself. If this was a multi-site environment, we might call it Outlook Head Office or Outlook Branch Office or Outlook Brisbane or something like that. But for this example, I'm just going to call it Outlook. So add that host in. Done. All right. Let's make sure that we can resolve that in DNS. Excellent. The next step is to create the client access array object itself. So we do that in the Exchange management shell. This is not something you can do in the console. You have to do this one in the shell. So open up your Exchange management shell and type in new client access array, and you can use tab to auto-complete these commands for you. And we'll give it a name. I'm going to call it Outlook, same as the DNS name, although it can be different if you want. The site name in this case is default first site name, because I didn't change that in Active Directory sites when I established my Active Directory. And finally, the FQDN, which is the DNS name of that CAS array, outlook.exchangebbootcamp.local. So that's the DNS name that we just configured a few moments ago. Right, so that command was successful. We've created a CasArray object called Outlook in the default first site name with the fully qualified domain name of outlook.exchangebootcamp.local. And you can see that the X2010 server, being a client access server in this site, has been automatically made a member of this CasArray. Now the next thing we want to do is have a look at the RPC client access server attribute on our mailbox databases themselves. So let's type in get mailbox database, and I'm going to format that in a list, so that's what FL means, and I just want to see the name and the RPC client access server attributes for each one. Alright, so there's our two mailbox databases, mailbox database 1 and mailbox database 2. And as you can see here, this RPC client access server attribute, when these databases were created, was automatically set to the name of a client access server within the same site as the mailbox server, which once again happens to be the same server because all these roles are installed on one server, but could just as easily be different server names. Now it is this attribute here, this RPC client access server, that the client looks up when it first connects and configures an Outlook profile. So that is why X2010 server.exchangebootcamp.local appears here in the profile information. But what we actually want to do is change this RPC client access server to use the fully qualified domain name of our CasArray. And the reason for that is that in future, if that fully qualified domain name was changed to resolve to an IP address of a load balancer, so that the RPC traffic could be load balanced across multiple client access servers, the clients would already be configured with the correct server name and wouldn't need to be reconfigured at a later date. So I'll go ahead and change that attribute now. And we just use get mailbox database to once again get those mailbox databases, and then we pipe that into a set mailbox database commandlet and set the RPC client access server attribute to outlook.exchangebootcamp.local. That's done. Let's have another look at those mailbox database settings, and you can see now the RPC client access server has changed to be the DNS name of our CasArray. So if a new Outlook user was opening up their Outlook for the first time now, it would automatically configure itself with that CasArray name as the Exchange server name. But what's going to happen to an existing user who already has their profile pointed directly at the server name? Let's take a look at that now. We'll close down Outlook, open it up again. Everything's connected okay, and we'll just have a look at the account properties. You can see that that hasn't changed at all. So this is the problem scenario. If you don't deploy your CasArray immediately up front when you're first installing Exchange and you begin to provision mailbox users onto Exchange 2010, their profiles may be configured directly with this server name. Then when you later come along and establish your CasArray, these profiles won't automatically update to that CasArray name, and if that CasArray happens to be pointed at a highly available IP address, these clients won't get the advantage of high availability for their RPC client access server. So the solution to that is to establish your CasArray first, make sure all your mailbox databases have that RPC client access server configured, and do all that before you provision your users on your mailbox server. And if you have deployed users already and they have this in their email profile already, you can basically just go ahead and recreate their profile. You can do that with a script or some other mechanism to force that profile to recreate itself. We'll do that now. So I'm going to do this the easy way and just remove the profile entirely. Create a new one. Okay, so Auto-Discover has picked up this information for me automatically. That's all fine. And this time you can see that it's actually the CAS array name that has come up here. So do that up front, establish your CAS array, even if it's just pointing at a single server in the site. And then later on, if you need to scale that out to some sort of high availability solution, you don't need to come back later on and fix up all your users' Outlook profiles.